Today, we're going to try and decode the hidden logic that really shapes our world. We're going to connect the dots between the stuff you own, the way massive wealth is created, and what actually drives social change, all based on a really deep look at our economic system.
So, here's the plan for this explainer. We're going to start by asking a simple question. What does property really mean? From there, we'll dig into how our current system can produce so much, yet so many people have so little. We'll look at the promise of an alternative system, and then, and this is key, we'll get into the debate on how you actually get there, which reveals what's described as a revolutionary switch that ties this whole thing together.
All right, first things first. To really get what's going on in our economy, the analysis we're using argues that we have to understand that the word property isn't just one thing. It actually describes three very, very different concepts.
Okay, I know. This might sound like a weird riddle, but stick with me here. The answer to this question is actually the key that unlocks the entire economic code of our society. It reveals the fundamental logic of how wealth and power really work.
So, the first type is what we all just think of as our stuff. This is called personal property. You know, your phone, your clothes, the place you live, your toothbrush. These are all things for your own personal use. The key here is you aren't using your toothbrush to hire people and make a profit, right?
And that brings us to the second and really crucial type, private property. Now, this is not about personal belongings. This is ownership of the things that create wealth, what are called the means of production. We're talking factories, big corporations, massive farms. And that word bourgeois is just the term used for the capitalist class, the people who own these things. This form of property is identified as the very source of class division and the main engine for generating profit.
Which, of course, leads us right to the third category proposed in the material, common property. This is the idea where those same means of production, all the factories, the technology, the infrastructure, are taken out of private hands and owned and controlled by everyone together, by the working class as a whole.
So you can see how important this distinction between personal stuff and private property is. But the next big question is, how does the fact that private property dominates our system affect how much personal property, the stuff we all need, is available to everybody? Let's dive into that.
According to this analysis, profit isn't some magic thing that appears out of thin air when something gets sold. It's actually created during the production process itself. Think about it like this. A worker might create, say, $100 worth of value in an hour, but they only get paid $20 in wages. Well, where does that extra $80 go? That's what the sources call surplus value, and it's pinpointed as the real source of all profit.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. We can see exactly how this works today. A case study in the source material looks at a retail group and breaks down the modern tools they use to squeeze out as much of this value as possible. Things like software that pushes people to work harder, contracts that keep wages and job security low, and even a culture that reportedly punishes people for speaking up. The analysis actually puts a number on it, calculating what it calls a rate of exploitation of over 240%. So what on earth does that number mean? It means for every $100 a worker is paid, the owners take an extra $240 in value that same worker created. It's a pretty stark measurement of that surplus value we were just talking about.
So, what's the bottom line here? The entire economic system is built to maximize that surplus value. It's all about profit. It's not designed to meet what society actually needs. We literally have the technology and resources to house everyone, feed everyone, provide quality healthcare, but if it's not profitable, it just doesn't get done. And this, the sources argue, creates a kind of artificial scarcity of personal property for the vast majority of people.
Okay, so if private property creates this scarcity, what's the alternative? Well, the sources then lay out a vision for a society based on common property, arguing it could create the exact opposite, a society of abundance. And here you can really see the two systems side by side. The core argument is this: when you change the form of property from private to common, you change the whole reason the economy exists. Instead of being chained to making a profit, all the amazing productive power of society, our tech, our industries, is finally let loose. It can be rationally planned to meet human needs directly, which creates the potential for an abundance of personal goods for every single person.
So, the billion-dollar question, right? How do you get from a society of scarcity to one of abundance? Well, the sources are very clear that this isn't something that just happens. They present a really sharp clash between two different theories of how to make change, and they start with a strategy they call a historical dead end.
This is called the two-stage theory. Basically, the idea is that the working class needs to hit the pause button. Step 1,
team up with a so-called progressive part of the capitalist class to first build a nice, stable capitalistocracy. Then, way down the road at some unspecified time in the future, you can have step 2, the fight for socialism.
But the analysis in the sources says this is basically a trap. By telling workers to side with one group of owners against another, you end up chaining them to the very class that lives off their exploitation. In essence, it's asking the working class to help put a new set of bosses in charge, kicking their own liberation way, way down the road, maybe forever.
So if that's the dead end, what's the other path? The sources then show us a totally different approach, one that argues for a direct, nonstop process of change.
And this is the whole idea behind the theory of permanent revolution. The point is that the struggle doesn't just stop halfway. The fight for basic democratic things, like free speech, and the fight for socialism, for economic power, aren't two separate stages. They're seen as one single, flowing, uninterrupted process. And the logic here is really important. The theory argues that the capitalist class is usually too weak, or frankly, too scared of the workers, to even carry through basic democratic changes. So the working class has to take the lead. But once it takes power, it can't stop there. It's immediately forced to start on the socialist tasks, and the very first one is abolishing private property and turning it into common property.
And that brings this whole thing full circle. The transformation of property isn't just one issue on a long list. It's the revolutionary switch. It's presented as the only way to finally break the chains of artificial scarcity and unlock the potential for a society of real abundance, where everyone has more than enough personal property to live a full and truly free life.
So, in the end, this entire analysis leaves us with a really deep question to think about. If the way we organize ownership is the basic code that structures our entire world, what kind of new possibilities could we even imagine if we changed that code? From one based on private ownership for profit to one based on common ownership for human need.